Marcus Allen was 41 years old when he heard the words that collapsed the last 3 years of his life into a single, unforgiving sentence. He had just climbed back into the driver's seat of his own truck, a 2018 Chevy Silverado with 89,000 miles on it, a crack in the passenger side mirror he kept meaning to fix, and a dog-eared Allstate insurance card tucked behind the sun visor. He had parked in the driveway of their house in Lithonia, Georgia. He had just come inside, set down the second set of keys on the kitchen counter, and walked back out quietly because Vanessa was on the phone in the living room and he did not want to interrupt. The new car, a white 2024 Toyota Camry XSE, fully loaded, sunroof, wireless charging, the one she had circled in a magazine 3 times without saying a word about it, sat gleaming in the same driveway beside his truck. He had paid for it in full that morning. $41,200. He had written the check without hesitating. He sat in his truck with the door still open and heard her voice carry through the screen door he had not yet closed. "Girl, I know, but Marcus is Marcus, you understand what I'm saying. He does everything right. Everything. And that's the problem." A pause, then her voice dropped. "Not enough. I've been seeing Dre again. 3 months. He gets me in a way Marcus never will." He pulled the truck door shut. He did not slam it. He sat there for 47 seconds with both hands in his lap and the engine off, listening to the faint sound of birds from the oak tree at the end of the driveway and the distant rhythm of Vanessa's laughter from inside the house. Then he did something the woman inside that house would spend the next year trying to understand. He took out his phone, opened his contacts, scrolled to a name he had not called in 11 months, and sent one text message. It said, "Still handling divorces? Before we get into the full story, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching from. And subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you cannot afford to miss." The alarm on Marcus Allen's phone went off at 5:15 every weekday morning. Not 5. Not 5:30. 5:15 because it took him exactly 22 minutes to shower, dress, and fill his thermos with black coffee. No cream, no sugar, the same way his father had drunk it and his father before that, and still make it to the first site walk of the day before the crew arrived. He was a project manager for a mid-sized commercial construction firm, Hendricks and Voss, that had been operating in the Atlanta metro area for 19 years. He had been with them for 11 of those years, starting as a site supervisor and working his way to senior project manager without anyone handing him anything he had not already earned twice. His work boots were Timberland Prio, size 11 resoled once. He kept them by the back door. Every morning, he laced them in the same order, left boot first, a habit he had picked up from his grandfather and never examined, and walked out to his truck before the neighborhood had fully woken up. He drove with the radio low, usually sports talk, sometimes nothing at all. He liked the silence. He was the kind of man who thought better in quiet. He managed 3 active commercial projects simultaneously that spring: a 4-story mixed-use development in Decatur, a medical office complex in Duluth, and a school gymnasium expansion in Covington. Each one had its own rhythms, its own problems, its own subcontractors who needed managing, and inspectors who needed answering, and owners who needed reassuring. Marcus moved between them with the calm of a man who had learned, somewhere in his 30s, that urgency and panic were 2 different things, and that one of them solved problems, and the other created them. On the Decatur site, there had been a framing discrepancy in the east stairwell, a 6-inch error in the riser height calculation that would have required the entire second-floor stair assembly to be torn out and rebuilt at a cost of approximately $84,000. If it had been caught at inspection rather than 2 weeks earlier, when Marcus had walked the drawings against the pour and noticed the number looked wrong. He had flagged it to the structural engineer on a Tuesday morning, confirmed the correction by Thursday, and the crew had rebuilt the run over the weekend without stopping the project's schedule. The general superintendent had said, At the Monday morning meeting, I don't know how you caught that. Marcus had looked at the drawings for a moment longer than the words in the room required, then said, I read everything twice. That was the kind of man he was. He read everything twice. He measured before he cut. He drove a truck with 89,000 miles on it because the truck ran fine, and spending money on appearances was not something he had ever understood. He clipped loyalty coupons from the Kroger app not because he needed to, but because waste bothered him at a cellular level. His coworkers had called him Steady Eddie for 8 years, a nickname he did not correct because it was accurate. He was steady. He had always been steady. He had met Vanessa Okafor at a birthday party for a mutual friend 9 years ago. She was 31, tall, with natural hair she wore in a puff on weekends, and pulled back for her job as an account coordinator at a marketing firm in Midtown. She was the sharpest person in any room she entered, and she made no particular effort to hide it. Marcus had liked that about her immediately. He had approached her not with a line but with a question. She had been looking at a painting on the apartment wall with the focused expression of someone genuinely thinking about it, and he had walked up beside her and asked what she saw. She had told him, he had told her what he saw. They had stood there for 40 minutes talking about a painting neither of them had known the name of. He had her number by the end of the night and called her the following Thursday, not the following day, because he wanted her to know he was not desperate, and not the following week, because he wanted her to know he was not indifferent. They had married 6 years ago at a small ceremony in Lithonia, 37 guests, catered by his aunt and decorated by Vanessa's cousins. He had paid for the honeymoon in Cancun in cash. He had bought the house on Stone Mill Drive the year after. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a backyard that needed work, a kitchen that needed updating, and a price that was reasonable for a man who had spent 11 years saving with the focused intention of someone who understood that money was not the point, it was the instrument. He had renovated the kitchen himself over 3 weekends with help from his younger brother Terrell, installing the subway tile backsplash, replacing the cabinet hardware, refinishing the original wood floors in the adjoining dining room with a belt sander he rented from Home Depot. The floors were the thing he was most proud of. They had come out close to perfect. Vanessa had run her hand along the grain on the first morning after they were finished and said they were beautiful, and he had stood in the doorway watching her and thought, quietly and without sentiment, that he had built something real. He had believed that for 3 more years. He had believed it on the morning he signed the check for the Camry. The signs had been there, he could see them clearly now, arranged in a row like a timeline he had been too close to read. It had started, he thought, sometime around 14 months ago. A shift in tone he had registered as tiredness or stress from a new account at work. Vanessa had been promoted to senior account manager 18 months back, and the role had brought longer hours and more travel, 2 or 3 days a month to client offices in Charlotte and Nashville. He had supported the promotion the way he supported everything she cared about. Quietly, completely, without asking for recognition. He had cooked dinner on the nights she worked late. He had managed the house around her schedule without making it a conversation. He had told her, when she'd worried aloud about whether she could handle the new scope, that she was the sharpest person he knew and that the company was lucky she was willing to give them more. He had meant every word. Somewhere in those 14 months, something in the quality of her attention had changed. She was present in the house, but not quite in the room. She would respond to something he said, but the response arrived a beat late, like she was listening from behind glass. She started sleeping with her phone face down on the nightstand when she had never done that before. She mentioned the gym more. She was going 3 evenings a week now, she said, a new commitment to her health that he had respected without comment. He had noticed that she showered immediately when she got home from those evenings, which seemed reasonable, and that she was sometimes still on her phone when he came to bed, which also seemed reasonable. He was not a man who looked for evidence of things he did not want to find. Once, in February, he had come home early from the Duluth site. An inspector had cancelled and rescheduled, and found the house empty when he had expected her to be home. She had texted 20 minutes later saying she was at the grocery store. She had come home with 3 items. He had filed it away as nothing and immediately forgotten it on purpose. The Camry had been his idea. He had noticed the circled magazine page in November. It was a millennial magazine feature on cars for women over 30, and she had folded the corner down on the Camry XSE page. She had said nothing about it. He had said nothing about it. He had spent 3 months quietly researching trim levels, comparing dealerships, calling his insurance broker to update the policy before the purchase. He had written the check on a Friday morning in February, arranged the detail and temporary tags through the dealer, and driven the car home himself that afternoon while Terrell followed behind to give him a ride back to pick up his truck. He had intended it as a statement. Not a showy one, a quiet one. The kind of statement a man makes when he is not tracking every expense against his own sacrifice, when he gives because giving is what love looks like in practice. He had not told her it was coming. He had just come through the front door, set the second set of keys on the kitchen counter, and said her name. She had come in from the living room, looked at the keys, looked at him, and gone to the front door and seen the car in the driveway. She had put both hands over her mouth. She had said, in a voice he had not heard from her in over a year, "Marcus." He had said, "It's yours." She had cried, he had stood in the doorway watching her cry, and he had felt in that moment like a man who had built something real and was still standing in it. Then he had walked back outside to give her a moment, and the screen door had not closed completely behind him, and she had already picked up her phone by the time he reached the truck. The text he sent to Patricia Dorsey Holt that afternoon was answered inside 11 minutes. She was still handling divorces. She had been handling divorces in DeKalb County for 22 years. Her office was on Candler Road, second floor of a building she had purchased outright in 2019. Her walls held degrees from Spelman and Georgia state law and a framed review from Atlanta Magazine that described her as the attorney the other attorney hopes you don't call. She had handled 240 cases since opening her practice and had settled or won 231 of them. Marcus sat across from her at 9:15 the following Monday morning and placed a manila folder on the desk between them. He had spent the weekend doing what he always did when confronted with a problem that required precision. He had documented everything. The folder held 3 years of joint bank statements, printed and organized by quarter. It held a spreadsheet he had built over the weekend. He was good with spreadsheets. That tracked 12 months of ATM withdrawals in amounts that did not match grocery trips or gas fill-ups or anything on their shared budget. There were 26 of them. They totaled $6,240. He had printed her phone location history from the shared location app they had set up during the pandemic and never disabled. He had not read her texts. He had not touched her phone. He had simply looked at what had always been available to him and never examined. Patricia Dorsey Holt looked at the folder for 4 minutes without speaking. Then she looked at him. "You put this together over a weekend?" "I read everything twice," he said. She closed the folder and set it back between them. "Mr. Allen, I've been doing this for 22 years. I have never sat across from a client who came to me this organized and this calm. Either you are in shock, or you are built different." She paused. "The good news is, it doesn't particularly matter which one, because Georgia is a no-fault state, but equitable distribution is not a formula. It is a story, and your story is very clear." She opened the folder again and tapped the first page of bank statements. 11 years of documented financial discipline, a paid-off home with substantial equity, retirement accounts, no joint debt, and documented financial activity she has not disclosed. She looked at him again. "Is there anything else I should know?" Marcus had thought about this for 2 days. "The house. I want to know the exact numbers on the house before we file anything." She nodded and wrote something down. "I'll get an appraisal ordered this week." She clicked her pen closed. "Don't change your behavior. Don't confront her. Don't move money. Don't mention the word attorney." You've built a clean position. The worst thing you can do now is disturb the surface." He drove back to the Decatur site and arrived for a 2 o'clock walkthrough of the stairwell framing. He reviewed the corrected drawings, confirmed the measurements, signed off on the run. He drove home at 6:15 and made dinner: pan-seared salmon, roasted asparagus, rice, and set 2 plates on the table. Vanessa came in from work at 7, said the food smelled good, and ate while scrolling her phone beside him. He ate without looking at her phone. He did not disturb the surface. His brother Terrell found out the following Saturday at their regular pickup basketball game at the YMCA on Memorial Drive. Marcus told him in the parking lot afterward, flat and precise, the same way he described a framing problem to a foreman. Terrell stood listening with his gym bag over one shoulder and his expression moving through several stages before landing on something controlled and deliberate. "Tell me who he is," Terrell said. "Andre Wells. They were together before we got married. He's in logistics. He lives in Brookhaven." Terrell was quiet for a moment, and she's been seeing him for 3 months. At minimum. Terrell turned and punched the brick wall beside the exit door with the side of his fist, not hard enough to hurt himself, hard enough to make the point. Then he turned back. "You want me to go talk to—" "No." Marcus said it without heat. "This gets handled one way. The right way. Completely." Terrell looked at him for a long moment. "You're not even angry." Marcus looked at the parking lot. A family was loading into a minivan 3 spaces down. A father lifting a toddler into a car seat with both hands, careful and practiced. "I'm angry," Marcus said. "I'm just not going to be stupid about it." Terrell became the person who helped him think through logistics over the next 3 weeks. He drove the extra car to Terrell's house the weekend before Patricia filed, so it would be out of the driveway during the process. He helped Marcus inventory the shop tools in the garage: a table saw, a miter saw, 2 DeWalt drills, a compressor, a collection of hand tools that had belonged to their father, and photograph everything with timestamps. He sat with Marcus 2 evenings a week at his apartment in East Atlanta, while Marcus prepared the financial affidavit, cross-referencing numbers, and making sure the picture was exactly what it was. Terrell never pushed. He asked what was needed, and he provided it. That was the only kind of help Marcus could use. The appraisal on Stone Mill Drive came back at $387,000. Marcus had paid $282,000 for it 7 years ago. He had refinanced once, at a lower rate, and the remaining principal on the mortgage was $131,400. The equity was substantial, and the equity was almost entirely the result of his income, his labor, and his documented down payment. Patricia had been direct about what that meant in a Georgia equitable distribution proceeding. On the 19th of March, Patricia filed the petition. She served Vanessa at the Midtown office on a Wednesday morning at 10:15, in the lobby, in front of the receptionist and a junior associate who had been walking through. Marcus was on the Duluth site when it happened. He was reviewing a punch list with the MEP coordinator, a methodical walkthrough of the second-floor HVAC rough-in. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. Patricia's name. He put the phone back in his pocket and finished the walkthrough. He called her back during the lunch break, standing by his truck in the parking lot with a turkey sandwich and his thermos. "She's been served," Patricia said. "All right." Her attorney reached out within 2 hours. She retained David Castile. "He's competent, he'll push on the house." "He can push," Marcus said. "The numbers are the numbers." That evening, he came home to find Vanessa in the kitchen. She was standing at the counter with a divorce petition in her hand, and when he walked in, she looked at him with an expression he could not fully categorize. Something between hurt and disbelief, and something else underneath that he recognized. From 22 years of watching other people's reactions to unexpected truths on construction sites, as the specific expression of a person who has just realized the thing they thought was certain was not. She said, "How long have you known?" He set his thermos on the counter. He sat down at the kitchen island. He was quiet for a moment. "Long enough," he said. "Marcus, "I'm going to sleep at Terrell's tonight," he said. "My attorney has the schedule for temporary living arrangements. She'll be in touch with yours." He stood up. He had already packed a bag. He had packed it over 2 evenings in small increments, organized by category, in a duffel that had been sitting in his truck for a week. He walked to the back door. He did not raise his voice. He had never raised his voice at her in 6 years of marriage, and he was not going to start now, on the way out. "I hope you're happy," he said. "I mean that. I'm not being unkind. I just wanted you to be happy, and I thought I was the reason, and I was wrong. I'd rather know." He went out the back door. He heard her say his name once, behind the screen. He walked to his truck, started the engine, and backed out of the driveway past the white Camry. He drove to Terrell's with the radio off. The mediation session was scheduled for the 14th of May at a law office in Decatur, a conference room on the 7th floor with a long table and windows that looked out over the intersection of Commerce Drive and East Ponce. Marcus arrived at 8:50, 10 minutes early. He was wearing a gray blazer over a white shirt, pressed slacks, and his good shoes, the ones he wore to owner-client meetings. He carried a single legal notepad and a pen. Patricia was already there, arranging a short stack of documents in precise order. She had told him, at their pre-mediation meeting, that David Castile would likely open with an aggressive position on the marital home and on the equity split, and that Marcus should sit quietly and let her answer everything until she signaled otherwise. Vanessa arrived at 9 with Castile, a compact man in his 50s, with reading glasses on a lanyard and the manner of someone who had done this enough times to stop being theatrical about it. Vanessa sat across from Marcus and did not look at him directly when she sat down. She looked at the window. She was wearing her work blazer, navy, the one she wore when she wanted to look composed. He noticed that she was not wearing the earrings he had given her for their 4th anniversary. He filed this away as information and let it go. Castile opened by laying out their position: equal split of the marital home equity, equal split of the joint accounts, and a challenge to the characterization of Marcus's retirement contributions as separate versus marital property. He spoke for 6 minutes. He was measured and specific. He was, as Patricia had said, competent. Patricia waited until he was finished. Then she opened her stack of documents and placed the first one on the table: the original purchase records for the Stone Mill Drive house, documenting the down payment, the source of funds, and the account from which they were drawn. Marcus had made the down payment 18 months before the marriage, from savings he had been building since his first year at Hendricks and Voss. The account was his alone. She placed a second document beside it: the documented record of home improvement contributions, including materials receipts, contractor invoices for the one licensed electrical job he had hired out, and the appraisal showing the increase in value attributable to structural improvements. She placed a third document: the record of 12 months of undisclosed ATM withdrawals from the joint account totaling $6,240, with no corresponding household expense. Castile looked at the third document for a moment. Then he looked at Vanessa. Whatever she said to him in a low voice across the table, his expression did not change, but his posture did. A small compression, the shoulders settling slightly, the body language of a man quietly reassessing the terrain. Marcus sat with his hands flat on the table. He had not spoken once. Patricia said, quietly and without performance, "My client's position is that the marital home represents primarily separate property investment, supplemented by marital labor contributions from Mr. Allen specifically, and that the equitable share reflects that history. Additionally, my client will be filing a financial affidavit that documents the undisclosed withdrawals and requests an accounting from Mrs. Allen of where those funds were directed." She paused. "We are prepared to be reasonable. We are also prepared to let a judge look at all of it." There was a silence in the conference room that lasted long enough for the ventilation system in the walls to become audible. Castile said, "Give us a moment." Marcus and Patricia stepped into the hallway. Patricia said nothing. Marcus looked at the artwork on the hallway wall, a print of the Atlanta skyline at dusk, and thought about the Decatur project and whether the east stairwell railing installation was on schedule. He was good at holding two things in his mind at once. He always had been. They were called back in 11 minutes later. Castile's position had moved. The negotiation that followed took 2 hours and 40 minutes and ended with an agreement Marcus had been willing to accept before he sat down. He retained primary equity interest in the Stone Mill Drive property. She retained the Camry at current market value applied against the settlement, and the joint accounts were divided with a downward adjustment reflecting the undisclosed withdrawals. No alimony was requested in either direction. No contested debt. Clean. When it was done, Marcus signed his name in 3 places. He capped the pen. He shook Castile's hand because the man had done his job professionally, and that deserved acknowledgement. He did not look at Vanessa when he left the room. There was nothing left in that room that required him. He moved back into the Stone Mill Drive house in June. The hardwood floors he had refinished were still close to perfect. The kitchen tile was still level. The backyard needed mowing, and he mowed it on a Saturday morning with his wireless earbuds in, listening to an audiobook about project scheduling he had been meaning to finish for 2 months. His neighbor across the fence, an older man named Earl who had lived on the street since 1994, leaned on the fence post at one point and said, "Good to see you back, Marcus." Marcus pulled one earbud out and said it was good to be back, and meant it. He repainted the master bedroom over 2 evenings, a medium gray called Passive, which he had always liked better than the cream Vanessa had chosen. He built a custom bookcase for the front room from plans he had drawn himself on graph paper, using poplar he bought from a hardwood supplier on Moreland, cutting it on his table saw in the garage over a weekend with a precision that made Terrell, who came over to help sand, say the pieces looked like they had been machined. Marcus told him to sand with the grain. At work, the Decatur project reached its certificate of occupancy in July. Marcus stood in the parking lot the morning of the final inspection and watched the inspector walk the east stairwell, the stairwell he had caught, the one that had cost nothing to fix because he had caught it in time, and sign off on the sheet without a single note. The project superintendent, a 20-year veteran named Calvin, who had been skeptical of Marcus for the first 3 years they worked together and had become something close to a friend in the years since, found him afterward and said simply, "Good job." Marcus said, "Good team." He meant that too. He did not see Vanessa again. There was no post-settlement coffee, no final conversation, no closing of a loop that had already been closed in the conference room on the 7th floor. He had said what needed to be said on the way out the back door, and she had heard it, and that was enough. He had no interest in a goodbye that turned the ending into something dramatic. It was not dramatic, it was simply over. One evening in August, he was sitting on the back porch in a wooden Adirondack chair he had built from a kit the summer before, cedar, stained dark, joints glued and screwed, built to last, with a mug of coffee that had gone lukewarm without his noticing. He was not looking at his phone, he was looking at the backyard in the particular last light of a summer evening, the kind that made the oak tree at the back fence look painted rather than real. He thought about his grandfather, who had taught him to drink coffee black. He thought about the stairwell riser. He thought about the floors in the dining room and how they had come out close to perfect. He thought about the morning he had set the car keys on the counter and the sound of the screen door that hadn't quite closed and the 47 seconds he had sat in the truck with his hands in his lap, and how that silence had been the moment when everything became clear, not painful, clear. There was a difference, and he understood it now. He picked up the mug and drank the last of the cold coffee without complaint. A man who measures twice is not surprised when things fit. He had measured twice, he had seen what was there. He had handled it with the same quiet precision he applied to load-bearing problems and hardwood floors and everything else in his life that deserved to be built to last. The oak tree at the back fence moved slightly in a late summer breeze. He sat and watched it for a while. He did not look back. There was nothing behind him worth looking at anymore. Only the work ahead, and the evening, and the cup in his hand, and a house that was, despite everything, still standing exactly where he had left it. That was the kind of man Marcus Allen was, and she had never once thought to check. If that story moved you, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's. I've already picked out 2 more that I think you're going to need to hear.